Our next speaker is going to talk to us, is going to be Orit, and she's going to give us, obviously, a good background on sort of fundamentals from a business perspective. Please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today here to speak about the U.S. Capital markets for the cannabis business. I've heard many interesting presentations about Canada and the European markets, and so I'm going to actually address the U.S. Again, my name is Orit, and I'm with a New York-based investment bank called Alliance Global Partners. We've been active in the cannabis business for a few years now, with listing cannabis companies on New York capital markets, New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. Also uplisting companies from other markets, whether OTC or other international stock exchanges, and then raising secondary funding for companies who are listing on the U.S. national capital markets. First is, obviously, and at least I've been meeting many companies interested and asking about what it takes to list in the United States. And I first want to address why the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange seem to be the very popular destinations, specifically for international companies. And obviously, as you probably know, these capital markets are the biggest in terms of market cap. The two biggest markets. After them, there is Japan, and then some other markets. New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ are very international versus other markets that seem to be more domestic, outside Hong Kong and London may be international as well, but NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange considered to be the most international place where you can see companies from many different countries listing their stock to be traded, and so the markets know how to work with international companies. And being that the markets are so big, it's very liquid. The spreads are very tight, which means that when investors buy stock on the U.S. markets, there's enough liquidity normally to sell and buy, and so there is lots of trading going on, and we're going to see the volumes on cannabis stocks on the U.S. capital markets. And the last thing, or maybe the most important things, companies who list on these markets, there aren't so many companies in cannabis, they get the best reputation of being the very transparent, very prestigious, big companies, and it's being listed on these markets actually increases the value of the companies. So being that there are many international companies and it's an international market, it's very much correlated to what's going on in the US and worldwide in terms of legislation and others. And so the US markets are very strict about the regulations. And so, as you know, cannabis is from the federal level is illegal in the United States. However, since there has been shift, as we've been speaking about, in the way cannabis is perceived and the law about cannabis, we also see the U.S. capital market somewhat being more flexible and accepting for the first time cannabis companies to be traded. Here are some changes that we've seen this year, 2018. So we've seen the first cannabis company being listed on NASDAQ. We've seen the FDA approved a drug for epilepsy for the first time. And we've seen the Drug Enforcement Administration allowed to import cannabis for testing of some medical drugs, which is a big shift for the market, especially if you compare it a few years ago. Used to be anything cannabis related used to be completely restricted. And as we see in the United States now, we have 10 states who allow recreational marijuana for smoking, and we've seen 33 states who allow medical cannabis. So the US, although very strict still, we've seen it being, the market being shifted, and so the capital market, some are expecting that is going to follow. And again, as I mentioned, it's not only the law in the United States. The NASDAQ, the New York Stock Exchange, reflects international trends. And I think as we've discussed, the overall attitude towards cannabis is shifting. You've seen, if you look at the map, you've seen being colored in blue and green. And this means that many more countries are allowing, again, recreational or medical cannabis to be used. Obviously, and if you see on the markets, each time there is an announcement that a big country, specifically when it was Canada allowing recreational usage of marijuana, you see the exchange, overall the stock prices going up, and the market getting crazy over every announcement. As this is going, any change in the international market means that the companies who are listed are going to be selling more, going to be doing more R&D, and overall the market is getting bigger and bigger. So the first movers we've seen in 2018, we've seen companies who are listed here either uplist from other stock exchanges or from OTC, and we've seen the company TLRA actually doing a straight IPO into the into the NASDAQ for the first time, which is again a big change. And once the other companies saw TLRA and saw Kronos and all these companies from Canada and from other countries being accepted to the NASDAQ, the next week another company announced their plans to go public in the United States, and then another one. So once there is a trend, I think we're going to see more and more companies trying to get into the stock exchange, and hopefully more companies being admitted to the stock and to be traded in the United States. And I want to say, and I want to highlight, many companies, they ask, can I be, what does it take to be admitted or to be accepted to be traded on these US stock exchanges? So I want to say so far there are only very, very few companies on NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange, still very strict. It's not only the financial requirements, which you see here, that many companies may be able to meet. There are also there is law, and any company who's not meeting any reporting requirements, any federal requirements, any requirements that relate to cannabis will not be able to list. And this means the first thing is, the first important thing is for US companies, to meet the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange, a company needs to be 100% meeting all the federal requirements. And since in the United States, the federal government does not allow the use of cannabis, some states do, but the federal does not allow that. This means that US companies, a bit of an irony, but they cannot list on the US markets. The only market that they can list on is the OTC, which is not a federal market like the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. But any other company who wants to list has to be 100% compliant with the law of their country. So a company coming from any other country who restricts cannabis and is somehow selling cannabis illegally in their own country will not be admitted. Any company with any officer who's ever been charged or suspect of any illegal activity the company will not be able to be listed in the United States. So it's still very strict, and even if companies meet all these requirements, the stock exchange does not give any assurance, or it does not have to admit the company. So the companies who go for IPO uplisting will not know until the last minute, will not know for sure if they're going to be accepted to be traded in the United States. Here are some of the general requirements. It's not the cannabis, it's just in general. So companies either need to meet some requirements for net income, shareholder equity, revenues, and this chart is on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ websites. Companies who can go over it and read. The companies usually needs to be operating for 2 or 3 years. They have to have some minimal equity, number of shareholder equities, et cetera, et cetera. Here are some of the companies who are trading on New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. As you see, there are very few. I think what's interesting here, at least for me, is obviously one is the market cap, which is in the billions many times. If you look at the multiples, you can see they get as high as, I see 824. The revenue is not really important. Companies who have like a 10 million revenue can trade at billions. It's more about, and we're going to see in the next slide, the assets of the companies. The asset being the IP, the agreements, the licenses, the grains that they grow. This is going to be the last slide, and here you can see each of the companies is listed, and with the assets that it has. And I've seen many people saying, this market cap is completely crazy and out of line, and how does it make sense? But I think at least that's what I see, is if you look at these companies and you look at their assets, the big companies actually have huge potential, and they do have very lucrative assets. If you look on some of the pharma companies, actually changing the way the pain medicine works. They're working on other receptors than the Tylenols and the morphine works. If you look at medicine for epilepsy for children, that's something really new, and it's been approved by the FDA. Car, for example, they have 0 revenues as for now. Their valuation, I believe, is because they have 6 drugs in their pipeline. Some of the drugs are stage 3, very much promise there. You never know, but it looks like with 6 drugs, there is a big, huge opportunity. And if you look at the companies who are actually cultivating, growing, selling, distributing, you can see that there have been many M&As. Companies are buying, are merging into other companies to capture market share when it's still early. They're doing M&A or agreements with different countries in different continents, so they do have early access to geographically diverse locations. You're going to see some, again, medical companies who have very innovative delivery systems, the way the drug is being applied, some sprays that you spray under tongue and they work quicker. And so I think to me, at least, it seems like the companies who actually were able to go to list in the United States into the national capital markets. Obviously, you never know, and maybe some of them will not be here in some time, but to me it looks like there is a huge promise, and again, the process is not easy. Many companies do OTC first or other markets, but I kind of feel like once you've been accepted and admitted to the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, it really gives you kind of a big check mark, or some kind of marks you as one of the strong companies who are likely to do something really big in the future. I think that was my last slide. Thank you so much.